Rob, the El Chapo escape fears are not unfounded. He tunneled out of the last Mexican prison where he was locked up and rode to freedom on an underground motorcycle. That was his second escape.
Joaquin Archibaldo Guzman Lara, born April 4, 1957, commonly known as El Chapo, is a Mexican former drug lord and a former leader within the Sinaloa Cartel, an international crime syndicate. He is considered to have been one of the most powerful drug traffickers in the world. Guzman was born in Sinaloa and raised in a poor farming family. He endured much physical abuse at the hands of his father, through whom he also entered the drug trade, helping him grow marijuana for local dealers during his early adulthood. Guzman began working with Hector Luis Palma Salazar by the late 1970s, one of the nation's rising drug lords. He helped Salazar map routes to move drugs through Sinaloa and into the United States. He later supervised logistics for Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo, one of the nation's leading kingpins in the mid-1980s, but Guzman founded his own cartel in 1988 after Felix's arrest. Guzman oversaw operations whereby mass cocaine, methamphetamine, marijuana, and heroin were produced, smuggled into, and distributed throughout the United States and Europe, the world's largest users. He achieved this by pioneering the use of distribution cells and long-range tunnels near borders, which enabled him to export more drugs to the United States than any other trafficker in history. Guzman's Sinaloa cartel, at the time of his arrest, was the wealthiest and most powerful of Mexico's drug cartels. It smuggled multi-ton cocaine shipments from Colombia through Mexico to the United States by air, sea, and road, and had distribution cells throughout the U.S. The organization has also been involved in the production, smuggling and distribution of Mexican methamphetamine, marijuana, and heroin from Southeast Asia. At the time of his 2014 arrest, Guzman imported more drugs into the United States than anyone else, that he took advantage of the power vacuum created by crackdowns on cartels in Colombia, gaining business and market share there as Colombia's own cartels were decimated. He took similar advantage of the situation when his rival cartels were brought down by an intense crackdown from the Mexican government, but the Sinaloa gang emerged largely unscathed. While still in prison in Mexico, Guzman was indicted in San Diego on U.S. charges of money laundering and importing tons of cocaine into California, along with his Sinaloa attorney Humberto Loya Castro, or Licenciado Perez, Lawyer Perez, who was charged with bribing Mexican officials on Sinaloa's behalf and making sure that any cartel members arrested were released from custody. After a ruling by the Supreme Court of Mexico made extradition between Mexico and the United States easier, Guzman bribed guards to aid his escape. On January 19, 2001, Francisco El Chito Camberos Rivera, a prison guard, opened Guzman's electronically operated cell door, and Guzman got into a laundry cart that maintenance worker Javier Camberos rolled through several doors and eventually out the front door. He was then transported in the trunk of a car driven by Camberos out of the town. At a petrol station, Camberos went inside, but when he came back, Guzman was gone on foot into the night. According to officials, 78 people have been implicated in his escape plan. Camberos is in prison for his assistance in the escape. The police say Guzman carefully masterminded his escape plan, wielding influence over almost everyone in the prison, including the facility's director, who is now in prison for aiding in the escape. One prison guard who came forward to report the situation at the prison disappeared 7 years later, and was presumed to have been killed on the orders of Guzman. Guzman allegedly had the prison guards on his payroll, smuggled contraband into the prison and received preferential treatment from the staff. In addition to the prison employee accomplices, police in Jalisco were paid off to ensure he had at least 24 hours to get out of the state and stay ahead of the military manhunt. The story told to the guards being bribed not to search the laundry cart was that Guzman was smuggling gold, ostensibly extracted from rock at the inmate workshop, out of the prison. The escape allegedly cost Guzman $2.5 million. Since his 2001 escape from prison, Guzman had wanted to control the Ciudad Juarez crossing points, which were in the hands of the Carrillo Fuentes family of the Juarez Cartel. Despite a high degree of mistrust between the two organizations, the Sinaloa and Juarez cartels had a working agreement at the time. Guzman convened a meeting in Monterrey with Ismael Zambada Garcia, El Mayo, Juan José Esparagoza Moreno, El Azul, and Arturo Beltran Leyva. In this meeting, they discussed killing Rodolfo Carrillo Fuentes, who was in charge of the Juarez cartel at the time. On September 11, 2004, Rodolfo, his wife and two young children were visiting a Culiacan shopping mall. While leaving the mall, escorted by police commander Pedro Perez Lopez, the family was ambushed by members of Los Negros, assassins for the Sinaloa cartel. Rodolfo and his wife were killed, the policeman survived. On February 22, 2014, at around 6:40 a.m., Mexican authorities arrested Guzman at a hotel in a beachfront area on Mazatlan, Malacon, following an operation by the Mexican Navy, with joint intelligence from the DEA and the U.S. Marshal Service. A few days before his capture, Mexican authorities had been raiding several properties owned by members of the Sinaloa cartel who were close to Guzman throughout the state of Sinaloa. The operation leading to his capture began at 3:45 a.m., when 10 pickup trucks of the Mexican Navy carrying over 65 Marines made their way to the resort area. Guzman was hiding at the Miramar condominiums, located at number 608 on Avenida del March. Mexican and U.S. federal agents had leads that the drug lord had been at that location for at least 2 days, and that he was staying on the condominium's 4th floor, in room 401. When the Mexican authorities arrived at the location, they quickly subdued Carlos Manuel Ramirez, one of Guzman's bodyguards, before quietly making their way to the 4th floor by the elevators and stairs. Once they were at Guzman's front door, they broke into the apartment and stormed its 2 rooms. In one of the rooms was Guzman, lying in bed with his wife, former beauty queen Emma Coronel Ispiro. Their 2 daughters were reported to have been at the condominium during the arrest. Guzman tried to resist arrest physically, but he did not attempt to grab a rifle he had close to him. Amid the quarrel with the Marines, the drug lord was hit 4 times. By 6:40 a.m., he was arrested, taken to the ground floor, and walked to the condominium's parking lot, where the first photos of his capture were taken. His identity was confirmed through a fingerprint examination immediately following his capture. He was then flown to Mexico City for formal identification. According to the Mexican government, no shots were fired during the operation. Guzman was presented in front of cameras during a press conference at the Mexico City International Airport that afternoon, and then he was transferred to the Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1, a maximum security prison in Almoloya de Juarez, state of Mexico, on a federal police Black Hawk helicopter. The helicopter was escorted by 2 Navy helicopters and 1 from the Mexican Air Force. Surveillance inside the penitentiary and surrounding areas was increased by a large contingent of law enforcement. Guzman was imprisoned at Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1, Area No. 20, Hallway No. 1, on the same day of his capture on 22 February 2014, that the area where he lived was highly restricted. The cells are without windows, inmates are not allowed to interact with each other, and they are not permitted to contact their family members. His cell was close to those of Jose Jorge Balderas, alias LJJ, former lieutenant of the Beltran Leyva cartel, and Jamie Gonzalez Duran, alias El Hummer, a former leader of Los Zetas drug cartel. Miguel Angel Guzman Lora, one of his brothers, was in one of the other units. Guzman was alone in his cell, and had one bed, one shower, and a single toilet. His lawyer was Oscar Quirarte. Guzman was allowed to receive visits from members of his family every 9 days from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., if approved by a judge, and was granted by law the right to receive about $48 every month to buy products for personal hygiene. He lived under 23 hours of solitary confinement with 1 hour of outdoor exposure. He was only allowed to speak with people during his judicial hearings. The prison guards that secured his cell were not allowed to speak with him. Unlike the other inmates, Guzman was prohibited from practicing sport or cultural activities. These conditions were court-approved and could only be changed if a federal judge decided to amend them. On July 11, 2015, Guzman escaped from Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1. Guzman was last seen by security cameras at 20:52 hours near the shower area in his cell. The shower area was the only part of his cell that was not visible through the security camera. After the guards did not see him for 25 minutes on surveillance video, personnel went looking for him. When they reached his cell, Guzman was gone. It was discovered he had escaped through a tunnel leading from the shower area to a house construction site 1.5 kilometers away in a Santa Juanita neighborhood. The tunnel lay 10 m deep underground, and Guzman used a ladder to climb to the bottom. The tunnel was 1.7 m tall and 75 centimeters in width. It was equipped with artificial light, air ducts, and high-quality construction materials. In addition, a motorcycle was found in the tunnel, which authorities think was used to transport materials and possibly Guzman himself. The escape of Guzman triggered a wide-range manhunt. According to Mexico's National Security Commissioner Monte Alejandro Rubido Garcia, the manhunt was instituted immediately in the surrounding area by putting up several checkpoints and air searches by helicopter. The entire prison was put on lockdown and no one was allowed to enter or leave. The search was then extended to other federal entities: Mexico City, the State of Mexico, Morelos, Puebla, Guerrero, Michoacán, Querétaro, Hidalgo, and Tlaxcala. However, most of the military officers involved in the search were sent to the State of Mexico. The Mexican government also issued an international warning to prevent Guzman from escaping the country through airports, border checkpoints, or ports. Interpol and other security organizations were alerted to the possibility of him escaping into another country. Flights at the Toluca International Airport were canceled, while soldiers occupied parts of Mexico City International Airport. Out of the 120 employees that were working at the prison that night, 18 that worked in the area of Guzman's cell were initially detained for questioning. By the afternoon, a total of 31 people had been called in for questioning. The director of the prison, Valentin Cardenas Lerma, was among those detained. On January 19, 2017, Guzman was extradited to the U.S. to face the charges and turned over to the custody of HSI and DEA agents. He was housed at the maximum security wing of the Metropolitan Correctional Center, New York, located in Manhattan. He pled not guilty on January 20th to a 17-count indictment in the United States District Court in New York.U.S. District Judge Brian Cogan scheduled his trial for November 5, 2018, when jury selection began. According to the prosecutors, juror anonymity and an armed escort were necessary, even if Guzman is in isolation, due to his history of having jurors and witnesses murdered. The judge agreed to keep jurors anonymous and to have Guzman transported to and from the courthouse by U.S. Marshals and sequestered from the public while in the courthouse. Opening arguments began Tuesday, November 13th, and closing arguments took place on 31 January 2019. Guzman was found guilty of all counts on February 12, 2019, and was sentenced on July 17, 2019 to life in prison plus 30 years in order to forfeit more than $12.6 billion. He was imprisoned in ADX Florence, the most secure U.S. Supermax prison, under Federal Register number 89914-053.